I'm Stephen Bader, the Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, or as we call ourselves, East Bay EDA. And we're very happy to have you join us here this morning for our latest speaker series event on industrial land use trends. We have a fantastic panel assembled, and we're going to be looking forward to hearing a lot of important and insightful comments from them. But before we do that, just some quick context. As many of you know, East Bay EDA commissioned a report called East Bay Forward that we published last fall, in which we had 12 different regional priorities as a blueprint for economic recovery, of which one of them was around land use policy, which is the subject of today's conversation. So as we continue our work forward, just know that East Bay EDA continues to be part of really actively working to pursue multiple strategies to help support economic vitality and recovery in a way that's more resilient, sustainable, and equitable over time. Before we begin today's webinar, I do want to just call out and ask for folks, we have a moment of silence for the horrific shooting that happened yesterday in Uvalde, Texas. Hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to those families and victims of that horrific event. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and have opening remarks. I'm going to hand this over to Supervisor Glover, who's Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, District 5, to provide a few opening comments, and he'll hand it over to his colleague, Candace Andersen, to begin today's webinar.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning. I am Supervisor Federal Glover, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to East Bay EDA Speaker Series, Industrial Land Use Trends. I appreciate the EDA's involvement with this topic, with such leaders as my colleague, Supervisor Candace Andersen, on its board. I represent District 5 in Contra Costa County. Geographically, my district covers the regions from the Bay to the Delta, roughly along Highway 4 and the Carquinez Straits. We branded the area covered by my district and part of my colleague, Supervisor Burgess' district, on the eastern edge of the county through Brentwood as the Northern Waterfront. The Northern Waterfront is a wonderful place, but it's not just a place. It refers to an economic development initiative that the county has been working on since 2013 to bring more jobs to our residents. This region was historically the industrial belt of all of the entire Bay Area. And the industrial businesses operating that have been doing what they've done for more than a century. But time has changed, however, and the businesses has transitions or left the area, resulting in several job housing imbalance that the opposite of the rest of the region. Contra Costa County has more employable residents than it has jobs. As a result of the job shortage in the county, some of the greater East Bay, our residents suffer from the worst commutes in California. As a resident of the Northern Waterfront communities endures 4 out of 5 worst commutes in the Bay Area, according to MTC, just this month, the latest headlines in Contra Costa residents have the longest average commute in the entire state of California. We do not have enough jobs in Contra Costa and the East Bay to support the residents' quality of life. I'm proud to support this event today and to highlight some of the ways which we're attacking that problem by identifying trends and land use that can support more jobs and investment in the East Bay. It's a special pleasure to highlight the project in Oakley, one of the Northern Waterfront's partner cities. As we look forward to today's speakers, I encourage all of you in the audience to think about ways that both policy and practice you and your organizations can share in our goals for more jobs for the people of Contra Costa County and the East Bay. Now on with the program.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am delighted to be here. I am Candace Andersen, and as Federal mentioned, I am his colleague serving on the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors. I represent the southern end of Contra Costa County, so the cities of Danville, San Ramon, Alamo, Lafayette, Moraga, Orinda, and a little bit of Walnut Creek as well. We are really excited today. I do also serve as a second vice president on our East Bay EDA as well, but we've got a really great panel for you today. And we're going to have an opportunity to have them provide their insight into our industrial land use. And so our panelists today, first, we'll be hearing from Katie Bowman, who is the Economic Development Manager for the City of San Leandro. We'll also be hearing from John McManus, who is the Vice Chairman of Cushman and Wakefield, and then from Joel Schrenk, who is a Regional Vice President of NorthPoint Development. And so with our esteemed panel, I'm going to just have each of them take a few moments to introduce themselves, their respective organizations, their roles, and really how they work with industrial land users and where you're operating. So let's go ahead and start with you, Katie, if we could, please.
Great, thank you. And thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, I work with the City of San Leandro with the Economic Development team. And part of what we do in economic development is serve as a liaison for businesses with the city. And we work with all types of businesses, but we do enjoy working with our many different industrial businesses in San Leandro. We have a strong industrial history, a strong and cohesive industrial area. And so we have both longstanding third generation companies as well as startups that we work with. And from a functional role, we do on a regular basis work with developers or brokers who are working to build new spaces or to lease spaces. And so we know many of you and work with you and are available for a call if someone is interested in a space in San Leandro to talk about what our processes are, what, if any permits would be required, things like that, and help to connect you with the right people, understand the policy and direction in the city and resources available. And then also we work with businesses. We have the ability to help them find locations, access to Costa, the commercial listing service. And so we do often work with small and large businesses to help connect them with property owners and help them to understand, whether there'd be any processes or things like that, or learn about resources that are available.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. John, let's just have you launch right into the same question. Tell us more about your organization and how you're working with industrial land users.
Sure. Well, Cushman and Wakefield is a global full-service real estate firm, which means we do brokerage, which I think is what people are most familiar with, the leasing and sales of buildings. But we have wonderful people across the organization that do property management, asset services, valuation, and there are probably 50,000 of us across the globe. Here locally in Oakland, my job is to help our clients fulfill their industrial real estate needs. And when that comes to industrial land, that might mean selling the land. It might mean leasing a building that's put on the land, and it might mean representing a user, whether they're a local company or a national corporation that's looking for a place to do business. So we touch industrial land throughout the life cycle, whether it's conceptualizing something for development, helping to shepherd it through the approval process, or leasing it or selling it on the back end.
Terrific. Okay, Joel, let's have you launch right in. Tell us what NorthPoint's doing in this field.
Thank you, Candace, and good morning. Thank you for having me. As she said, my name is Joel Schrenk. I'm the Regional Vice President for NorthPoint Development. NorthPoint is a national industrial real estate developer, so landlord and developer. And so we are actively seeking to acquire land, get that land entitled, design and construct and lease industrial facilities all across the country. So we're active coast to coast. In this neck of the world, we have a signature project in Contra Costa County within the city of Oakley. We call it Contra Costa Logistics Center. And so our primary job, with respect to industrial land users, is to provide them a home. Class A industrial buildings that meet their needs from a labor and logistics perspective at a good price. And so we work with cities and we work with brokerage firms that like Cushman & Wakefield, where John represents, to build the correct product and to attract tenants to our parks. And so we're really proud of the park that we've developed and are developing in Contra Costa County within the city of Oakley, and we look to continue to do that here in the future.
Well, terrific. Well, Joel, let's just sort of have you continue, since you're on camera at the moment. Give us a picture. What are the demands, uses of space that you see really growing and then shrinking as a result, as it relates to industrial uses? You talked about your spot in Oakley. If you've got any other areas you're working in the Bay Area, but really, what do you see in the demand?
Yeah, it's an interesting time we're in now in the cycle, given kind of the macroeconomics of the U.S. What I would say is we're seeing a lot of users grow in the need to deliver to clients same day or next day. And so that involves just more space within closer proximity to the population pool. We're also seeing users require more a physical footprint of space within the warehouses. So average lease sizes are getting larger and larger as more and more product is purchased online. If you think about how, what happened during the COVID pandemic was a lot of people reverted from in-person shopping to online. And so, and we also have grown, impatient as a user or consumer of online products. We expect that product to arrive the very next day, whereas 5 years ago, you'd be happy if it arrived in 7 days. And so what that means is more warehouse facilities closer to the population. And that's why, we were attracted to the location in Oakley, specifically because of the location to the population. And so, we're seeing, like I said, size of these facilities grow and the number of them grow as more people convert from in-person to online shopping.
Terrific. Katie, let's jump to you. What are you seeing happening in San Leandro? What type of industrial businesses are coming in? What are the demands? I think we all know the warehouse that Joel just brought up is a huge issue, and it's got a lot of consternation, including my own county, as to, are we just going to have certain parts of the community just be warehouses to help our delivery services, for people like Amazon? So what's going on in San Leandro?
Yeah. So we do, the fundamentals, I would say, of the industrial market, particularly here, remain strong, and we continue to see demand for Class A modern industrial buildings. And so we continue to see interest in building new space. And also, just kind of some other trends that we're seeing is users, particularly startups, need spaces right away. They need short timelines and have challenges waiting for build outs, waiting for processes. And so we have landlords looking to get things set up. On the delivery front, we do, we have historically, and continue to have pressure from the distribution demand. And we do have that. We have seen, and John may speak of this a little more, but one particular distribution user, we are seeing kind of their expansion slow a little bit. And so actually we've had a couple of high profile buildings get released to some other types of users. And so we're always looking to balance that. We have some, we work with people and have different processes and review. But, I would say for new spec buildings, the demand for distribution is the highest on those. For legacy buildings, we also start to see if there are spaces with existing infrastructure, in particular existing manufacturing infrastructure, Those spaces, thankfully, we are still seeing some, continue to see those have high value for manufacturing users. So for instance, we, have, if we have bakery spaces coming up, those types of spaces with walk-in coolers and that really specialized infrastructure, we are seeing movement into those spaces and from different parts of the Bay Area. I think, as we all know, the East Bay offers a lot of benefits for companies and users, where, as we mentioned, this is where your employees live. This is where there's a good transportation, good BART access. And so we see companies moving from the peninsula. And so, especially for those buildings that have that value, thankfully still seeing, continue to see manufacturing interest in them.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Well, and so John, you've got a little bit of a different perspective because you're seeing it really from both sides, from those who need space as well as those who have space to offer. What are the trends that you're really seeing?
Well, this would be a different conversation, I think, if we were here in January, even of this year. Since 2019, industrial land prices have roughly doubled, depending on where you are. Rents are up 50%. It has been, I think, when we look back on it, it will be the most historic period in industrial real estate, I think, that we've ever seen. Maybe since the Industrial Revolution, when people moved from farms to cities. It's been amazing what's happened, but it's changing. And you heard Katie reference Amazon. It's no secret. They said it, in their earnings report and their calls, and you're seeing it in the press and all over the place. They're pulling back. And they're pulling back, they're subleasing space, they're terminating, negotiations, they're doing pre-work on construction and stopping the process. I mean, they have pulled a lot of things. And I don't think, and I don't know, but I don't think that we'll ever see them come back in the way that they did, which was just to almost gobble up everything that was there. And it really raises an interesting question, because there are so many policy decisions that are being made that are, stop this Amazon, stop this last mile. I think that is more yesterday's news. And when you look at what happens, and I do think more of it happens in southern Alameda County, but the very same building that could accept an Amazon with truck docks across the front and the high ceilings and all those things are turning into other uses, whether those are like one of the Amazon buildings that got subleased in San Leandro. It's a company that does automated vehicles, and I don't know how much we can say about what they do, but it's a very high-tech use. Same building. We've seen life science companies come across from the peninsula looking for large footprints for manufacturing. It's the same building. We've seen electric car companies come over for components in their own manufacturing. Again, it's exactly the same box. And so I think we're going to see more of those types of companies, and we may talk later about what the future holds. I think there should be some concern for all of us in the pullback in the markets, because the venture capital has been withdrawn a little bit. And so we don't see IPOs. So the funding for some of those things may be slower for a while, but we are at a turning point here, and I don't think any of us knows what it is, but I do think we're going to see a different industrial market over the next 12 to 24 months than what we've seen for the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay, that's we joke a little bit about our crystal balls, how foggy they are, but I think your concern is shared by a lot of other people, and that's sort of some of what your thoughts sort of lead into some of the biggest trends you've seen both in the industrial flex markets. Do you want to just carry on and talk about what the trends are? I think certainly you talked about post 2019, when we were all shopping online, we were afraid to go into major retailers. We did see that big explosion, and it sounds like Amazon was on a major shopping spree of their own, gobbling up these industrial sites so they could expand their warehousing. What are the other big trends that you've been seeing both pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and where we are right now?
Sure. I think even pre-pandemic and following through, there's been a change in the way these buildings are designed. They generally are going to have more parking, or the ability to have more parking, so they can be more flexible. And they're going to have more power. Now, on the one hand, that could be for an automated material handling system, so that because labor is so difficult. But the other thing that we're seeing is more power for these manufacturers. And so you need to have that in place. I'll let Joel address this, but the other thing that we're fighting, and hopefully with some of this, I'm not going to call it a slowdown, but changes in demand, we're going to get back to a more normalized schedule. But if I went to Joel today and Joel had a piece of land that was entitled, because he would have spent 1 to 3 years entitling it here in Northern California to get a building built, but he hadn't started yet, and I had a user, it might take him 18 to 24 months to stand that building up because we're waiting so long for the components, the roof, the electrical panels to come in. And so the timeline is really long. And that's an important trend, again, I think on the policy side to keep in mind. We've got to get some of these buildings up, because right now we're talking about deliveries, if we start today, 24, 25 at best. That's not good enough for those fast moving companies that Katie referenced. You need to have some inventory standing at some point. So
absolutely. No, the supply chain issue is a huge one. I know government's always an issue, just how quickly we can process an application and whether we have CEQA challenges, other things. But I think you're absolutely right. The supply chain makes it really very, very challenging. So Joel, let's just jump right over to you then. Tell us what are you confronting as you're building in Oakley, and how bad is it?
Well, yeah, I'll kind of continue where John left off on the supply chain. Speaking in terms of Oakley, we have one building remaining that we're developing that's available to lease. To that point, one of the major trends is lead time of electrical equipment. I mean, if I placed an order today, the main electrical gear that serves power to the building is 40 to 45 weeks from the day of order to delivery at the building. I mean, think about that. That's 10 and a half months, right? So as John said, once you get past the entitlement challenges and you're able to start putting a building in the ground, you still have a much longer time. Prior to the supply chain disruption, that same electrical gear would take 8 to 10 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks. So you've seen a tripling of the lead time for these. Another thing to keep in mind too, again, echoing or continuing what John said on the power, both as spaces get larger and tenants get a little more sophisticated with automation and material handling equipment, they're also going to start putting in more of the infrastructure needed for electric powered vehicles. Cal Green mandates a small percentage of the building to be equipped with the infrastructure for EV electric vehicles. But some of the more sophisticated established tenants, you might think of Amazon or some of the other big Fortune 100 companies, they are really leaning into fully equipping their sites with all the infrastructure needed for future electrification. So what does that mean? That means pre-installing all of the conduit underground prior to putting in the pavement, to where every single stall could be equipped with electric chargers in the future. I mean, it's a huge investment in infrastructure on a private development. And what we as developers are concerned about is, it's already difficult in this area with the utility companies to get power on a timely basis to meet the schedules of our tenants. Again, a lot of these tenants come in and they're in a hurry. It's hard to project in this economy a consistent pattern of trends with respect to their increased demand. And so once they finally decide to lease a space from us, we're having a real challenge with the local utility companies on predictability of permanent power. And then further to that, I think when we really get into electrification of all of the vehicles that operate, within these facilities, I think there's going to be an extreme strain on the utility grid to serve these industrial parks. So it's a trend that we need to keep in mind as we're going forward. Just the full electrification, because I think we all can kind of see that's going to be the way of the future, both for the consumer and on the commercial end. I think one final thing I'll just mention is, spaces are getting larger, as I mentioned before, and buildings are getting taller. One of the things that you're seeing is building clear heights keep getting taller. So where a couple of years ago 32 and 36 foot clear And clear height is just the definition of how high can you stack material within your space before you hit the roof structure, the underside of the roof structure. Now the common standard is 40-foot clear. And so what that means for cities and municipalities there sometimes are building height restrictions that have to be dealt with during entitlement, which also can slow down the process. In certain parts of the country, we're starting to see highly automated and refrigerator usage where the clear heights extend up to 70 and 80 feet high to meet the automation required for the particular user. Again, think of the big sophisticated Fortune 100 companies that are doing that. So I think it's going to be a real challenge going forward to find locations where the jurisdiction understands all these different nuances and is able to craft policy that at least you can have a conversation and negotiate on how, what is allowed and what won't be allowed for these users.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so, Katie, this is perfect timing for you because a lot of what Joel was just talking about really some of it's entitlements, when you're talking about, height limits, maybe reach ordinances or ordinances that we have in our county with regard to how many charging stations you need to have, which probably doesn't go beyond what a tenant might want as well. But how are you prepared to handle the infrastructure needs? I think that's a concern of a lot of people. Do we have a sufficient grid in any of our communities to really handle full electrification, reach ordinances? And I'm not sure if San Leandro has a reach ordinance, and then just the real changes and demands that may be counter to what a city council expects buildings in their city looking like. So besides what you were already going to talk about, it would be great if you could comment on those as well.
Thank you. And yes, so, I would say in general, we're seeing users and owners, and the city all looking to incorporate more sustainability measures. And so, yes, the city of San Leandro is considering a reach code, and reach codes are additional local amendments to the building code that have requirements above and beyond what the California building code requires. And in particular, one of the things that is being looked at is related to EV, electric vehicle charging. And so that is definitely something for users and developers to keep in mind. In our case, it would be looking at for new construction. And so, we're balancing a lot of things there. And so I know I've been talking a lot with the industrial community about their needs with regards to that. And but also for users and developers to keep in mind East Bay Community Energy for cities that are in that area. They are acting as a thought leader on this, and so they have some recommended EV charging requirements, and so often that's what we as cities look to. So if you're curious as to what they're looking at, that's a place to look. But what we have heard from at least the developers and industrial players that we spoke with, certainly in new construction is really a different conversation and more feasible than retrofitting for EV infrastructure. And then, and I think there's the general understanding that over time, as Joel mentioned, the need and demand is increasing. And so there's different ways to prep prior to doing, the full chargers and things like that. So we're definitely seeing that. Other things with regards to reach codes are looking at electrification versus gas equipment. And certainly what we've heard from industrial businesses, and we know this, we work with them, right? As I talked about, there's bakeries, there's people using kilns and things like that. And so not all industrial processes, what we hear is that not all industrial processes are, and really this highly specialized, highly, this highly intense equipment is not necessarily set, ready to be electrified at this point. And so we definitely hear that, and then I think that whole market's going to have to adapt, particularly for users that have need for high heat and things like that. And so those, but in general as well, as Joel mentioned, there's the Cal Green Code, which already has really pretty high requirements, and businesses are already looking at ways to put in solar and things like that. And so that definitely, should be on the radar. But on the business side, we are as well seeing companies kind of a trend of really kind of more biotech and what I would call clean tech companies moving to the East Bay. And for instance, on the clean tech side, that means battery companies, that means companies looking at really making cleaner, more sustainable processes. We see some working on improving industrial processes here in San Leandro, which we think is a great fit based on our ecosystem, as John mentioned, a business working on, automating, equipment and things like that, or companies working on more sustainable cleaning ingredients, more sustainable ways to make fertilizer, all sorts of things that serve the industrial and other kind of food production processes. And so that we certainly support. Those do have unique needs though, but it's definitely a trend we're seeing. And then your final question about the electric grid, I don't have all the answers there. I would, so we obviously are not the electric provider in the city of San Leandro. PG&E has the infrastructure, and East Bay Community Energy is the energy provider. And I think that is definitely a discussion that is going on. We do hear challenges with timing, with getting new service or expanding service set up. It really is something that we hear about. Certainly the best options are buildings that already have heavy power. And so those have value, a lot of value. Yeah, and so I think I would, for all players, and from the utilities to the owners, to the businesses, to the cities, to all know that demand on the electric system is only going to increase. And I think, there's more to come there.
Absolutely. And I'm looking in our comments, I know the challenge of the electrification and even the hookup, to PG&E is a big challenge. I will say from a government standpoint, it is also, PG&E is a fabulous partner. They work really hard to try to make accommodations and get things moving forward. But it is a challenge because it really is one company that's trying to do that. And just as you have your East Bay alternative clean energy, we do have MCE in Contra Costa County, which is formerly Marin Clean Energy, but we partner with them, which they are purchasing a lot of sustainable sources of energy. But it is a concern of, are we going to have that clean energy supply, or at some point for electricity? Do we have that sufficient source? I did have one person say, Joel, that for them, your voice dropped when you talked about changing height. And I think I heard you saying 70 to 80 feet high is what some companies are really looking for. Do you want to just quickly elaborate on that before we go on to our next question?
Yeah, I would say, and sorry about that, I would say 70 to 80 feet is a specialized use. It's not the common. So I would say just the takeaway for the building height trends is users keep demanding taller buildings. And I think 40-foot clear today in 2022 is kind of now the new normal for what a user would expect for a clear height of a building. I gave the example earlier about some of the even higher clear heights than that for specialized cases. And, users looking for, as I said, 60, 70, 80 foot high clear buildings don't have a lot of options in this part of California, given some of the regulations in place. And I think it makes the jurisdictions nervous because it seems really high, but it's, and it's kind of out of the norm. But I would just say the takeaway is users keep pushing the limits on height and size of their premise.
Okay, which I will say city councils and boards of supervisors don't always want to hear. So Katie, let's go back to you. We're going to go to our question really, and we're going to shift a little bit. But in a COVID-19 endemic world, how does the public private sectors work together more effectively to alleviate the challenges that some of our small mid-sized businesses face in finding affordable space to grow in the East Bay? And we even have, a comment from one of our viewers here to say, it seems like the little guy, the mom and pop light industrial user, the cabinet shop is the classic example. Needing 5,000 square feet is really out of the cold in this market. So do you have any comments on that and how you're helping as a city, how those spaces are available for mid to small to mid-sized businesses, finding affordable space when they want to start to grow out of their garage or wherever else they've been in the East Bay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have all the answers, and I think this is a really good discussion for us as cities to brainstorm together on. But I think in general, as always, keeping the conversation open, having forums like this, hearing, the owner, broker, business perspective, and then the city perspective as well, or the small business perspective. I think as you mentioned, and as Amalia mentioned, we do see often right, those smaller users a mismatch in the market, and it's been like that, but I think the pressures are increasing or the challenges are increasing because of the costs of building and what the developer or institutional owner is looking for. And so often we see smaller businesses as they mentioned, either looking for more affordable leased space, or also mid-sized businesses we often see are looking to buy space, but finding space to buy on the market is quite hard in our experience. And so institutional owners have, looked to build and hold. And so, kind of finding that mismatch between people looking to buy and people looking to lease. And so don't have all the answers, but what we do as a city is we do work with smaller users. As I mentioned, we have the ability to help them find space, the ability to help connect them, with owners and brokers, and we have those relationships. And so I think, it's something that we're going to continue to think about and work on. But one example of strategies that I have seen work is, looking for balancing maybe larger sites with some smaller spaces that may be more affordable with larger or more market rate spaces. So either that could be with a larger market rate industrial space, or we have a site here that has retail as well. And so retail can help serve as a as a strong base financially for a project. But those examples are not the norm. And so we are always encouraging owners to think about more smaller spaces, more campus style developments. We certainly in the Bay Area are seeing, at least, prior to, as John mentioned, this trend may be softening a little bit, but a lot of venture capital investment in startups, and those startups do, have, interest and need for smaller spaces or looking for flexible spaces. And so there is a demand there. And so when we do see the smaller spaces on the market, certainly we've seen them be successful.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, John, then let's just launch right into you. What are you seeing when you have a client or your company does that really needs that small, medium space? Are those available? How do you find them? Are they certain parts of the East Bay that they're easier to locate? Or are you finding people who are willing to carve up their larger space to lease it out to be smaller and sort of subdivide a little?
It's difficult, and it's difficult for a number of reasons. We haven't really built any space like that for probably 20 years. And I know that the answer is, well, that the institutional developers and the big users, they all want the big sites, but there are 2 and 3 and 1 acre sites out there the economics are really difficult. And, I had a conversation with one developer a few months back, and I wish I could give you more precise detail on this, but he wanted to do a food incubator. And in order to give each user their own water service, there was going to be a fee for each unit from the utility East Bay Mud, and it was really, really significant, right? So there's no one thing that we can do, but I do think that we have to look at some of these charges. If you're going to build a 10,000 square foot building, some of the hookup charges and the fixed fees are the same as they are in a 100,000 square foot building, but you can't spread it out over 100,000 square feet. It's a single, utility hookup to that one small building. And so all of those fixed fees are spread across a very small building, and it's difficult. So to the extent that we can, instead of looking for one big answer, find a whole bunch of small answers to maybe reduce those fees on the smaller buildings, to encourage development, to expedite applications at the city and county level, and to get our utility. You guys have all been very kind to PG&E. My power went out in the middle of the night last night. I don't know why, but it does all the time in my part of Contra Costa County, and sometimes it's scheduled and sometimes it's not. But we need to, it's a major economic development issue. I mean, there are, companies out there that have generators running in their backyards in order to get power because everything else is up and it's not ready to go. And for those companies that have to stay in the Bay Area, they put up with that. But for those companies that, and it's not unusual that people come to me and say, I need a list of properties in Reno, Phoenix, Northern California, and Southern California. And when you start to realize that that's what the competition is, there are a whole lot of small things that we need to fix. And I want to make one other comment, maybe two, about the reach codes, because these panels are never fun unless there's a little bit of disagreement. I'm all for the reach codes. I think they're fantastic. And it's important that we head in that direction. But we hear so many times from the municipalities that they're short-staffed, and it's terribly hard to hire planners and people to shepherd these things through. Every community that's doing reach codes is doing it on their own locally, and that's taking really, really valuable resources away from sitting at the front desk to talk to that cabinet shop and that person that needs to process a tenant improvement application. And they're working on another project, worthy project, but we have these Cal Green codes and we have very talented people. Maybe these communities should get together and write a single set of codes, for the groups on the 880 corridor in the county, and move in that direction and reallocate those resources to try to process some of these backlog tenant improvement applications and things that are there. The second part goes to the natural gas thing. And I hear what you're saying, Katie, and I think San Leandro is going to exempt it. But we don't know what the capacity of our grid is, but we do know that we're under capacity. It's not unusual that I'll have somebody with a big power requirement to call PG&E and say, sorry, we don't have that in the street. It's not there. So if we pulled the natural gas off of every water heater and air conditioning unit and stove in all of our communities, do we have the capacity to electrify all of that? And I think we need to be really careful. That's where we want to get to. But if we get there too fast, those people that need to pay those electrical bills to turn their stove on are going to be really, really unhappy, not to mention the industrial users who are coming in. So it's fine.
Okay, well, thank you for that insight. And the sufficiency of the infrastructure is something I think those of us who read a couple of weeks ago, Palo Alto, is really confronting that. And it's not even just the source of electricity, it's just the actual transmission, the infrastructure to transmit the electricity as well, that we all need to be planning for. And there is, there's talk in Sacramento of course, having state policies toward a statewide reach code, and we keep hearing it's a few years out. And I agree, it's much easier if we don't have piecemeal legislation, but we either have it by county or by the state, so that we're all playing by the same playbook. And each time you show up in an entity, community, you're not having to figure out what do they want versus what does across the street where I'm in a different county or a different city, what do they need? So Joel, let's talk to you. I mean, again, this is sort of the question. I'll repeat it because we've we've talked a little bit, but in this COVID-19 endemic world, how do you see public-private sectors working together to really alleviate the challenges for small and mid-sized businesses? And I don't know if with your business park, I don't want to necessarily call it business park, but your development, if you're really envisioning small to medium businesses, but maybe you can even talk about the partnership you felt you've been able to develop with City of Oakley or with in other areas where there's been that valuable partnership.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hit on was, I think one of the reasons why our development in Contra Costa Logistics Center was such a success was there's such a strong partnership between NorthPoint and the City of Oakley. You know, that site was a redevelopment site with a previous use. There was environmental history. There was a whole lot of challenges. And so I give the City of Oakley credit and the Contra Costa County credit for really coming to the table and being willing to kind of discuss and discuss different ideas and strategies for how do we navigate the entitlement process. I think, you know, it's easy for me to say from one direction, from a developer's perspective, cities, you got to make the entitlement process easier. You know, that's not necessarily fair. I think on the other hand, cities have to realize that, you know, industrial use is only going to be growing, even in these tenuous kind of economic times. I think in the long term, it's going to be growing. And so I think there needs to be conversation and collaboration between developers and cities on how do you solve, how do we both get solve the needs at hand. With respect to small and mid-sized businesses at our park, I'd say a couple things of what we've done. John is correct. The economics of building a new Class A building to serve a 5,000 square foot tenant are very, very difficult. But what we have done is we've designed and equipped our buildings to be demisable, to where we can put multiple tenants, sometimes up to 5 or 6 in a single building. And so, you know, one example in one of our buildings in Contra Costa Logistics is a company called Pacific Pride Logistics, which is a local small business, relocated to our facility, and we put them in a small part of our larger cross-dock warehouse there. You know, so yes, our park has Amazon as a tenant, but it also has a local business, and we were able to demise that facility and get them in there, and by all accounts, they've been tremendously pleased with the building. And so that's probably the best way to tackle it is building a Class A building that small with today's construction prices and inflation is just untenable. But you can design flexibility into the space, because at the end of the day, if I'm building a speculative warehouse, I don't know who's going to occupy it. I have to have the flexibility to put 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 tenants under the same shell building. And so therefore there needs to be flexibility in the electrical systems and the mechanical systems and some other things while I still meet the code. And so we've been proud of that. And I think there's other businesses that are not the brand name businesses that you read about in the news within our park. And you know, that demisability and that flexibility allowed that to happen.
Well, and before we leave you on this question, Joel, you started out saying you had a strong partnership with City of Oakley and with the county. Do you have any good advice for others who want to establish that relationship? Was it just these were warm, inviting people, or were there things you did to foster that relationship so you really could get things done?
They are warm, inviting people, but I think it's more than that. You know, like what I tell people when I introduce our company is I just say, look, having old fashioned values, meaning saying what you say you're going to do, really matters, especially nowadays. And so I'd say that my advice would be, we went down and met with the City of Oakley and the county on a very regular basis, you know, sometimes weekly. And it was that over communication, that in-person, face-to-face meeting. And at the time, we didn't have a physical office or presence in the local area. You know, we do now in Sacramento, but at the time we didn't when we were entitling that site. And so that the effort to travel, get on a plane, sit face-to-face with the city, really kind of to where we could walk together through the process. And we weren't just a voice on the other end of the phone call or an email. It was actually sitting in their office, talking through the challenges, understanding what they wanted and what we wanted to get the project done. I mean, there was a whole host of things that happened out of that. I mean, one in this was applicable to the East Bay is there's now a trail that we designed into the whole park that connects Bridgehead Road to the other side of our development. And so that'll connect to a wider trail system that will serve the greater community. And it's conversations like that and in-person meetings, you just can't replace that. And so I would just encourage everybody to, if you're local, that's great. You have no excuse to be communicative and there in person. But even if you're more regional or national, you have to make the effort to regularly sit down and have a discussion. And they appreciated that. And we formed a great partnership and trust of one another. And trust is key.
Trust is always key. So thank you. No, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Okay, John, we're going to go to you with this is our last question that we gave our panelists ahead of time that we'd be talking about. And if we have time, we're going to get to some additional questions posed in our chat. But what do you really see the role of legacy reuse opportunities? So we've got this wonderful Northern Waterfront in Contra Costa County that has ship access, it has rail access, obviously it has vehicle access. But what are the challenges of balancing new growth industries with some existing ones? Because we still do have some of our older industrial uses on the Northern Waterfront. What do you see happening?
Well, I will tell you that NorthPoint turned a lot of heads with the project that they did in Oakley. And I get calls regularly from people that want to emulate that. And I think that there has been a model that's been established. There are a number of companies that were here on the 880 corridor that went out there, and they went out there because they realized that a lot of their employees lived out there. I think Supervisor Glover was right on target. I mean, that Highway 4 commute is really tough. And you're basically giving somebody 2 hours of their life back every day by locating out there. So a huge advantage, I think. I think you will see other developments similar to what NorthPoint has done. I think that one of the challenges on the Northern Waterfront, and I don't work there every day, I'm a little bit more Alameda County, but I think one of the challenges is that the in-place stock is much older. The stock of buildings, and people are looking for different amenities, whether it's clear height, whether it's the size of the truck courts or fire sprinkler systems. So there is going to need to be some reuse of the buildings. I don't think that having new technology companies in any way a negative for an existing basic materials company, whether it's a refinery, whether they're doing traditional refining, or a lot of the refineries are changing over, or whether it's a metal bender, somebody that's doing fundamental basic steel work, or somebody that's doing autonomous vehicles. I don't think that the addition of one is a negative to the other. I think it's actually great. There's skill sets and ideas and things that go back and forth. So I'm excited for the Northern Waterfront because I think that the most valuable resource, which is labor, for every one of these companies is there. And I think that's going to be really great news for the future.
Well, thank you so much. Katie, obviously you're not connected with the Northern Waterfront, but you've got your own industrial sites that have potential reuse, new growth industries. What are some of the challenges you see in your area?
Yeah, as we've talked about in some of our other questions, the process to build new, the economics to build new, have length and challenges. And so one thing that we have seen at least one site take a look at, as John mentioned, is rehabbing an existing building. And for instance, even maybe looking at raising the height, raising the roof, and finding that to potentially be more economical and time efficient than building new for a host of reasons. And so not starting from scratch and using some of those existing approvals set aside or existing clearances, from not triggering different environmental requirements and things like that. And so we are starting to see some interest in that. And then, looking at legacy users with newer users, I think as John said, I don't know that it's a huge problem for us. And so, but what I would say is one thing that does start to come into play is looking if there are users that, whether it's the legacy or the new, that maybe have, hazardous materials or more impact from their use, balancing out and just looking at the overall, technical things going on at a site comes into play, and making sure that it's safe and designed in a way that'll be able to be maintained. Also on the legacy reuse challenge, I think, as we've mentioned on some other questions, is right, looking at getting sufficient power in existing buildings, getting sufficient water or water pressure for fire suppression is also something that we work with. So we see users putting in tanks for their fire suppression, backup tanks, and then that need generators and things like that. And so, we're grateful. A lot of our infrastructure is sized well, but, as the needs change and expand, I think, balancing out, new code requirements, new infrastructure requirements is always a challenge, but sometimes rehabbing still makes the most economic sense. So, and I think for the smaller businesses, certainly rehabbing existing buildings can offer, they're more naturally affordable. So.
Absolutely. Okay, Joel, what about you? When you came in, did you find any incompatibility with the site you had selected with existing businesses, other industries that were already there, or even the former uses of your own site?
We came in, we don't think we saw incompatibility. That location was at the time pioneering. There was not a lot of other developers. In fact, that site that we purchased was passed over by a number of other developers. I know John probably has the exact names and quantity, but it was the vision wasn't there for most. And so I think the role of legacy facilities, I think, for us, it's what we're focused on. I mean, because for one, as Katie mentioned, there's a lot of benefits to it as far as available power, and it's already established locations. We love it for the labor. I mean, we're going to have, when we're fully built out and stabilized, 1,500 to 2,000 jobs there in that park serving those buildings, whereas they would have been commuting, a much further distance prior to that. And I think, from a labor and access perspective, legacy sites offer a lot of superiority to just continuing to, develop greenfield sites, we call them. And so, we are really focused on it. I would say that it is a lot more technically challenging. And so there are, cities and developers specifically need to have the technical expertise to be able to tackle sites like that. It's exponentially more difficult dealing with, previous uses and their potential, environmental history on a particular site. So, but as long as you have a competent developer and a city willing to see the vision and a collaborative discussion, I think legacy reuse sites are really what should be focused on. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got about 2 minutes left. And so I think the last question I'm going to throw out there is, how do you balance affordable industrial space for legacy tenants versus big distributors, the industries, as someone puts, such as cannabis, they can pay a little bit more to get this? How do we balance helping small businesses? And Katie, I think this may be a question for you. Does your city council have any policies in place to try to balance that?
I'd say as an economic development team, we work to connect small businesses with available resources. And for instance, during the pandemic, really worked a lot to connect them with the different emergency response things that were available. And formal programs, we don't have as many right now, but we are going to be doing some strategic planning and working on that. And so we, find the most success working with businesses one-on-one, but are always looking for additional ways to help businesses.
And that's what I think probably a great takeaway is sit down with the city, with the county. We all have economic development directors. We want to help you accomplish what you want to get done, and it's building those partnerships. We are out of time. I am just going to let everyone know that we do have a really fun event on June 16th, and this is the East Bay EDA Innovation Annual Block Party that is taking place in Oakland and at the Bridge Yard. And this is where we're going to roll out our Innovation Award winners. So we want you to all come to that. In the chat, there's a link where you can learn more about it, or on our East Bay EDA website. But beyond that, thank you all. Great questions. I appreciate everyone on the chat who was giving us some insight of what they were wondering. And to our panelists, you were absolutely awesome. And I think everyone is going to walk away with a renewed desire to create something great. Find some building, bring more businesses to the East Bay, because we do have an amazing workforce. We have an amazing place to live, and there are so many opportunities here. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you.